welcome to Commander Central, episode 271, and today we're going to be talking about hate. Specifically, what strategies we provision hate for in our decks, and what those plans are. I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.
What's up, boys? How's it going today?
It's Friday after a long week.
It is. Well, I guess the show airs on Monday, but we are recording on Friday, and we have been kind of shifting around our recording times because we had meetings all day and work stuff happening, and Chris needs to leave as soon as this is over to head into the shop to work, so we're all chasing our tails, I think.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
And I want to say thank you to the two of you for doing a show last Friday when I was not available to record. Thanks a lot. Yeah, that was a good show. I listened to it on Monday when it came out. Nice job covering, so thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for appreciating it.
Yeah, no problem. That's what we're here for. We're a team. I'm glad you got to help your mom sign on her new Harley and take a ride around town.
I helped her because she did buy a new place here in town, not too far from me, and so I was helping her with that, and then she moved in this week, so I've been busy in between my usual stuff. I've been helping her with that as well, so I've been chasing my own tail a lot this week. But I think it'll be kind of a chill weekend, so I'm looking forward to that. Chris, I wanted to specifically ask you something.
I didn't do it. I have alibis.
The answer is still no.
No. What's up?
What are you thinking of all the Forgotten Realms stuff, you as the D&D player among us, with the alt arts and a lot of the Forgotten Realm characters and like the rule book looking arts, that kind of stuff? Is that getting you pretty hyped?
What if I told you I haven't looked at any of it yet?
Oh, really?
I've been so busy with other stuff between Pokemon and our Modern Horizon stuff that came out at the shop, and then trying to spend time with the family. It's like my life literally is go to work, come home, sit down for like an hour to recoup, go to bed, get up and do it again the next day.
Yeah, I hear that. Well, the one thing that really jumped out at me is some of the alt art cards have like that 1980s looking D&D kind of almost like black and white sketch art from like the old Monster Manual kind of stuff.
Ooh.
It looks super cool, even if you're someone who didn't really play D&D like I didn't. I played a little, but not much. But it's such a very specific aesthetic, and that's really awesome to see. And I think they also revealed a couple of there's like some lands, like an Evolving Wilds was at least one we saw, that looks like an old like monster card that you would get in like the Monster Manual with like all the stats on it and stuff. They have some lands that are done like that as well.
Why do they keep printing Evolving Wilds? Like,
I don't know.
We need Terramorphic Expanse. Give us Terramorphic Expanse again in a cool art.
But yeah, it was still, I'm like, I can imagine anyone who's a D&D nerd is super into this stuff, because even me who isn't is kind of hyped. It just looks so cool.
Yeah, I know we have been getting a lot of questions about, when can we pre-order this? When can we pre-order this? And it's like, man, we haven't even gotten our numbers back from distributors to tell you if we can pre-order or not.
Well, there's even this weird dungeon mechanic where like there's these cards that they're kind of like sagas a little bit. They're like bigger sagas that have more options, and you can choose your path. So like when something happens, you bring this dungeon into play, and then whenever you do a thing, you advance to a different room in the dungeon and get a different like reward, draw a card, you scry to whatever it is. As you advance to this little side game dungeon thing, that's actually a mechanic in the game.
That seems sweet.
Yeah, I mean, it's super flavorful. I am, despite the fact that we keep getting clubbed over the head with new products, I don't know, I'm really kind of into this one. So, yeah, looking forward to seeing all these previews starting up the next week or two.
Right.
Since preview season never ends.
Well, it should. Usually going into the fall is when it slows down a little bit, so.
What did I see? I think it was Jeremy Knoll had a tweet this week that was like, previews start next week and the week after, and of course last week and the week before that as well. I was like, yeah, that's exactly basically how it goes. If you out there in listener land want to tell us whether or not you are hyped for the Adventures in the Forgotten Realms set or anything else out there, how would you go about doing that, Chris?
You can find us on a multitude of social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter at CMDR Central. You can search us up on Facebook, CMDR Central. You can find us online at cmdrcentral.com, and you can also find us on YouTube by searching CMDR Central.
You can also head over to patreon.com/CMDRCentral. Check out our reward tiers such as the Decks You Play show, or just joining our community to chat with us and play some virtual EDH.
Very, very cool. So let's kind of jump into this topic here to have a conversation about things we use the term, I guess, hate. Particularly I always hear graveyard hate, but realistically, we're talking about like answers to different strategies or different things you encounter in games. And some are more important than others. And sometimes it depends on who you play against. Sometimes it depends on maybe your personal play style as well, because I don't think it's the same for every single person. So I kind of want to talk about this and figure out how we each handle these individual things that we encounter in games and what our game plan is to deal with it when we encounter them. So I mentioned graveyard hate, and that's a pretty popular strategy. And I'll start with you, Max. Is that something you specifically provision? So like, okay, I'm building a brand new deck, or I'm tweaking this deck, whatever. I need to have some things to deal with the graveyard in it, or do you just, if it works out, it works out, and if it doesn't, it doesn't? What's your plan for dealing with graveyard stuff that other people are doing?
I do the bare minimum, and I run a scavenger grounds. That's pretty much all I do in all of my decks. Just because I kind of know our local meta and kind of our online meta, a lot of people do play some graveyard hate, so I kind of rely on my opponents to help me out in that category. Okay,
so it's not something that you delve too deeply into other than scavenger grounds. That's really it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll run a Bojuka Bog in my Regnan Krov deck, but I don't really have ways to tutor them up. I don't run an expedition map, so it's more of a hope I find it when I need it type of situation.
Okay. How about you, Chris? What's your plan when dealing with other people's graveyards? Do you worry about that at all when you build a deck?
No, because I play with my own graveyard. I don't want my graveyard gone. What are you talking about? No. In decks that run black, I usually run Bojuka Bog because it is a targeted player's graveyard. Yeah. Other than that, not really, but I have been upping it lately. Like in Mogus, I re-added there's a 1-mana enchantment that whenever a card goes into opponent's graveyard or wherever it gets exiled or something like that. It's kind of like a Leyline of the Void type of deal. Other than that, I really don't jam too much hate in there because I don't like the fact of completely shutting down someone's entire deck if I were to play like a Rest in Peace or something like that.
Sure.
So I want them to actually have an ability to play. And the way I look at it is the best removal is player removal. So if you're going too ham with something like that, I'm just going to target you out of the game so I don't have to worry about it anymore.
And that's actually kind of a good point because graveyard stuff tends to be at least a little bit slow and a little bit telegraphed. Not always. I mean, you get sometimes someone entombs something on turn 2 and reanimates it, and that's pretty quick. But like a lot of times it's a much slower strategy where they're putting things in the yard and reanimating, like a Marin deck or something, Muldrotha. You can see that coming, right? Their commander needs to be in play. They're putting stuff in the yard and bringing it back. Like it's usually not coming out of nowhere. And if you need to respond to it or remove the person or remove their commander to stop it, you kind of can. That is definitely an option in a lot of cases. Myself here, you guys mentioned Bojuka Bog and Scavenger Grounds. I do run those in any deck that can. So like if I'm playing black, there's a Bojuka Bog. I'm playing Scavenger Grounds in every one of my decks. I verified that. Because there's no opportunity cost really for that. You can put them in the deck, and if you don't see a graveyard problem, then they're just the land that taps for mana. I guess Bojuka Bog comes into play tap, but it taps for black. That's just not that big of a deal. So I put those in all of my decks because it's just easy. There's just almost no reason not to. I also have been tending to run Soul Guide Lantern in a lot of stuff. I think I still have Nellel Spellbomb in one. Relic of Progenitus kind of does a similar thing. So in those cases, those are really cheap to cast. You're not going to burn a turn casting a Soul Guide Lantern. Similarly to Scavenger Grounds or Bojuka Bog, the opportunity cost is pretty low because if you don't see a graveyard you need to deal with, you can crack them and draw a card. They have that option right there on the artifact, so it can replace itself. So like you're not really wasting a slot necessarily. I'm kind of with Chris to a degree that I don't want to just lock people out of playing their game. I do have a Leyline of the Void in my Athreos Pestilence deck because it's a pretty heavy enchantment-based deck, and it just in that deck makes more sense to run an enchantment that has 2 black pips on it to turn my commander into a creature if I want to than it does a Soul Guide Lantern or something. But that's the only place I run Leyline of the Void in any of my decks just because it fits with that deck. Otherwise, I kind of am in the same boat. I don't want to shut people down entirely, but I want to be able to deal with the problem if a problem comes up.
Yes, agreed with that.
So the next thing is lands, and I guess we could talk about, this doesn't have to just be non-basics, but for me, it's usually non-basics that are something I worry about dealing with, like a Gaia's Cradle or a Nykthos or something. So to you, Max, what's your plan for provisioning, dealing with lands, or probably especially non-basics? Is that something you worry about when you brew a deck?
So I mainly just run the basic Ghost Quarter, Strip Mine, Field of Ruin, pretty much any land destruction land. I don't tend to run stuff like Back to Basics or Blood Moon, mainly because I don't play red, but I don't run Back to Basics or anything just because I think there's a bit of a degree of power level there where if you run back to basics, you probably have a way to find it and kind of lock out people out of the game, and that's no fun. That's not the play experience I want everybody to have unless we're all on that same page.
And Chris, how about you? What's your plan here for dealing with lands that are a problem?
Well, it depends on what deck I have. Now, if we talk about like my 2-color decks, I obviously run way more because you're not limited in what you have to do because you're not so spread out across the board in multiple colors. So, like for instance, in my Rakdos deck with Mogus, I play 4 land destruction lands in the deck. I play the Field of Ruin, Ghost Quarter, Tech Edge, and the Strip Mine. And that's what I run for that. But I also run, Blood Moon, like Max was discussing. I also run Ruination in there to destroy non-basic lands. And whereas Max was talking about he doesn't like, because like I can tutor all these up. The thing is that I play so many non-basics that when Blood Moon comes out, it actually hurts me as well. So it's not like it's not a big deal. It's just like, well, it's hurting me just as much, but I'm locking you down too. Now, Ruination is the same thing. I'm playing so many non-basics that I destroy all my own non-basics. So it's more of a, tit for tat. If it's going to hurt me and hurt my opponent, then I don't care. I'd rather have it that way than just straight out locking my opponent out. Now, in other decks, such as like the Spider deck that I just built, I'm playing cards like Movolny Acid Moss, where I destroy a land, but I also get to go get a forest out of it. So I'm getting double value out of it. So I want to play cards that are more like that in a type of deck, where it's slower and I don't care if I'm destroying someone's lands because I'm just going to go farther ahead and play my big 6-drop Spider that sucks anyways. So if they can't deal with it, that's their problem, I guess.
Yeah, I'm definitely on board with the land removal lands. Again, similar to the Scavenger Grounds and Bajuka Bog thing, there just isn't a cost really for running a strip mine or a wasteland or whatever. Field of Ruin and Ghost Quarter, if you're desperate, they can be used to fix your own colors if you need to. You can get a landfall trigger off them if you need to in a deck too, so like they actually can be a offensive weapon versus defensive. But like I feel like if I don't have 2 and I try to run 3 ways to remove lands, you're going to lose when someone drops a Nykthos and they've got the ability to tap it for 10 mana, let alone a Gaia's Cradle or a Sarah Sanctum in an Enchantress deck or something. If you're relying on combat damage and someone's got a Glacial Chasm out, there's a pretty good chance you're going to lose that game when you can't punch through damage for 3 or 4 turns. Even a Maze of the Ith can screw you over in some situations. So like you just need to have, I think, that option. And it's just so easy in terms of lands because there's just land removal lands and you can just jam in a deck and have them there as an option. If you don't need them, you don't need them. So that's the main thing I do there. I don't have mono red deck, so I'm not sure what I would do with like a Blood Moon. But I do have mono blue, and I did once upon a time run back to basics. I don't anymore for kind of the same thing you talked about with Graveyard Hate, Chris, is yes, there were games where I felt like I was punishing someone who was being greedy. I remember a few years back playing at our shop when it was, or a different shop we played at, and I ran into one of those guys playing like a Kozilek deck that had, 15 mana rocks or something in it.
Oh no.
And the goal was to like get Kozilek out in turn, 4 or something. And he cast, I can't remember if it was a Scorched Ruins or one of those Lotus Field, whatever it was, one of those old reserve list lands where when it comes into play, you sacrifice multiple lands before the new, not the new one, which is Lotus Vale, right? Or Lotus Field. Lotus Field's the new one, Lotus Vale is the old one. And the person had got out a couple rocks, dropped that, and next turn Kozilek was coming down, and I dropped that back to basics, and he couldn't untap, and then next turn somebody Vandal Blasted.
Oh no.
But I was like, I didn't feel bad about that. Like, no, you're ramping out Kozilek on turn 4 or 5. I don't care if you can't play the game.
Yeah.
However, there were enough other situations where like someone's just playing a janky 3 or 4 color deck that's got gates in it and stuff, and they just happen to, their opening hand is like 3 dual lands of some sort, and they just don't draw a basic, and I would drop a back to basics, and just they're just screwed then. And it didn't happen that often, but it happened often enough that like it felt bad. So I just didn't want to do that. So for that reason, I don't run back to basics anymore. And I would imagine if I was playing a mono red deck for the same reason, I probably wouldn't play Blood Moon, although I think Blood Moon is a little bit easier to play around because at least you can use the lands and tap them for colorless. But
yeah. See, now back to basics I'm fine with as well, like because I play it in one deck and I play that in my Petitioner's deck. And you gotta, when you put in those types of cards, you gotta look at, the the status quo of the card type of deal.
Sure.
So like in my mill deck, with the petitioners, is I need all the help in the world I can get.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to play it back to basics and you're going to get mad about it and be like, hey, I'm trying to mill 300 cards off you guys, so you can just chill out a little bit, I mean, come on.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And also, like, that deck, if you're in a position to drop that too, you might be in a position where, like, you can just mill somebody out the next, like, you can just hit that person with mill next turn and take them out.
Yeah.
I've also found, like, in my Tuvasa deck, there's been times where I've used either, like, a Song of the Dryads or Imprison the Moon to take care of a problematic land, since both of those enchant permanents. Well, Imprison the Moon hits lands, but the other one enchants any permanent. So I've definitely used those in the past to turn that Nykthos into a forest, or turned that Maze of Ith into a colorless mana source. So those are other ways that you can maybe deal with problematic lands if you don't want to take up a land slot.
Yeah, definitely. How about planeswalkers? Max, is that something you think about when you build a deck? Like, do I have a way to deal with planeswalkers? Do you provision cards specifically for that purpose?
I totally do. It's called creatures, and they swing and they hit the planeswalker right in the face, and they die. But for real, yeah, like I say this all the time. I like the combat step, so that's how I deal with planeswalkers. Most of the time is through combat. Depending on the deck I'm playing and what color, I run some exile removal of any permanent or destroy target permanents. But mainly I deal with them with creatures, and I hit them in the face, or I just move right to player removal because you can't activate the planeswalker if you're no longer in the game.
That's very, very true. How about you, Chris? What are your thoughts on planning for planeswalkers?
So the biggest thing I do when thinking about that, it depends on what kind of colors of decks I'm in. Like if you're in the black-white aspect of a deck, you have access to Vindicate, Anguish Unmaking, Utter End, that kind of stuff where it can hit anything. So it's not really just thinking about it as a planeswalker, it's just that it just gets lumped in. The thing I've noticed about planeswalkers, though, too, is that when they hit the battlefield, it turns into a mini game of kill the planeswalker.
Yes.
Everyone turns on the planeswalker.
Right.
So it's something I usually don't think about anymore because I know that planeswalker is not going to survive long enough to really, need to waste a spell on it. Now, it could be like a Nicol Bolas or some other monstrosity of a planeswalker that needs to die from a spell, and then you're kind of SOL. Right. But usually you can kill up, quickly enough with just combat damage.
So yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I don't. Yeah, and Max actually was very succinct in summing it up. You've got creatures. Like you could usually poke through creatures, and people tend to run creatures with some kind of evasion just to get through for damage anyway, which makes it easier to get through on someone else's planeswalkers. The one thing I did kind of notice is there are a couple cards I'm running that do remove or do deal with planeswalkers, and when I go to make a cut, I think to myself, well, it does hit planeswalkers, so maybe I will leave this in. So I'm thinking of Hero's Downfall. Hero's Downfall, we've got a couple black spells, in the last few years that you could maybe replace Hero's Downfall with. But whenever I look to do that, like, for example, is it Deadly Rowlick? Is that the instance, the one that you can cast for free if you don't have your commander?
Correct.
Or if you have your commander out, excuse me. I added that to whatever deck it was. I remember, like, the thought process being, okay, do I want to remove Hero's Downfall or go for the Throat for this? And thinking, there's enough times when Hero's Downfall hitting a planeswalker is useful if I happen to not have a creature or don't want to waste a creature hitting the planeswalker. I'm like, I'll go for the Throat. So, like, once in a while that comes up. The other one is Hex Parasite I have in one deck. And there's been no times when I'm looking to make a cut, and same thing. I'm like, I could pull Hex Parasite, but there's just been enough of those times when I've used it to, I've paid a couple mana and killed a planeswalker with it by taking the counters off.
Yes. Yeah, I have a few cards like that as well.
Yeah. So, like, I wouldn't add Hex Parasite to a deck for that purpose specifically, I don't think, but the fact that it's there and has that utility already makes me want to keep it in the deck.
I think Chris brought up a great point about how when planeswalkers come out, they're kind of like a mini game where who's going to be the first one to destroy the planeswalker. And I think that really kind of can snowball, because unless you have like maybe a really solid meta where it's the same group of people every week playing at your kitchen table, you can't be prepared for always running into maybe like a Super Friends deck. Sure.
Right.
Dana, you have Dejeru, but you don't play it every week or every other week to that degree. So I think if you... The fact that if you have a Super Friends deck in your group that isn't played a lot, I don't think you should really build your decks to battle that one deck. Yeah. Every deck probably has 1 to 2 to 3 planeswalkers in it just because they are powerful cards. But, like, how often can you really just be like, well, I need to pack 16 pieces of removal that actually hit a planeswalker outside of creatures.
Exactly.
Like, eventually you got to realize, how am I going to win the game if I put 20% of my cards towards dealing with one person's specific deck that I rarely see get played?
Well, in the Destroy the Planeswalker minigame is kind of a unique thing, too. Like, when someone plays a doubling season, yes, people want to remove the doubling season, but the person in mono black's like, well, I can't. I'm not going to, like, I'm not going to do it. Like, I've got no cards in this deck they're going to deal with it. And the mono red player's like, well, maybe I'll top deck a Chaos Warp. So you're kind of relying on other people to handle that problem. When someone drops a Narset, everyone at the table can be like, I can take a swing at that. Like, you can all participate in removing it in a way you can't with other permanent types for the most part. So yeah, that's kind of a unique thing with Planeswalkers as well, and that's I think definitely a reason I think people tend to not just run like specific Planeswalker targeted spells. The one exception here maybe was I ran the Elder spell in my Vela deck for a while when I had 7 different Tezzerets in the deck. Because when I had 7 of them, the odds were really high. I'd have a Tezzeret out most of the time, if not, more than one. And the ability to, like, even if I just killed one Planeswalker with it and put 2 counters in Tezzeret, that was usually a pretty good deal. So I met two criteria there. I always had a Planeswalker to put those counters onto, and therefore it was pretty good value just to kill one person's Planeswalker. Now that I'm down to, I think, just 4 in the deck, and it feels like there's not consistently one out like there was when I had 7, it's become a less useful spell now since rotated out of that deck. So, yeah, I think you need the added utility. I think like all those examples are Planeswalker hate cards that have other utility as well. And if you don't have the other utility, they're probably not as good. The next one I'm going to lump together because a lot of time, and we can discuss the individual artifacts, enchantments, I guess, is what it is. We can discuss dealing with them individually here, but like people tend to run things that hit both artifacts and enchantments. And, I've seen Max literally wearing a t-shirt from the guys at Legendary Creature that say always provision, enchantment, and artifact hate.
I wore that t-shirt yesterday.
Did you? Oh, nice. So what's your plan with that, Max, when you build a deck? Do you have a number in mind, or do you just throw in some really good removal spells for artifacts and enchantments and kind of tweak to flavor based on whether or not it works or not?
I have my favorites, so like the austere commands, the cleansing novas, the crush contrabands, those are kind of my favorites. Return to Dust used to be up in there. But I also tend to run other ways to maybe not destroy artifacts and enchantments, but kind of disrupt artifacts in Blind Obedience. That's a great card that causes all artifacts to enter your opponent's control, enter tapped along with creatures. And we found that works really great when someone plays a Mycosynth Lattice on the board and everything's an artifact. That's a great way to slow the game down.
That just happened pretty recently.
Yes, it did. But otherwise, like, green is filled with them. Like, I run Unravel the Aether and Deglamour. Anything, I prefer, like, the shuffle in more than the destroy, just because graveyard strategies exist. You can pull cards out of your graveyard, maybe not as easily for enchantments, but definitely artifacts. There are tons of artifacts that let you return an artifact from your graveyard. Mm-hmm. So the fact that if I can shuffle in that Worm Coil, and so you don't get the two tokens, or I shuffle in that Darksteel, the one that makes everything indestructible, that's just
Forge.
A way to get, thank you. It's just a way to help the entire table out, not just maybe myself. Green has a ton of other ones. Pier's Whim is probably one of my favorites in green, just because it can let me be a little political. I can say, hey, you're my friend and you two are my foes, and hopefully you have only one artifact or enchantment out that you can sacrifice.
How about you, Chris? What are your thoughts on this one?
Well, I play the greatest colors in Magic, so we don't worry about that stuff ever, because we're just better, so we don't have to. We're on a higher tier than you peasants, so that's where we're at. No, actually, the colors I play, we get shafted pretty hard with that. For enchantments, because for red, you can destroy artifacts all day long. You have so many spells that do it, so it is what it is. Now, in decks that I'm playing that have the other colors, I will play your Crush Contraband, your Austere Command, that kind of fun jazz, just because I want as much value for the card that I'm casting as possible. Now, like I brought up Vindicate and all those other ones, those are cards I prefer to play because I can do it to anything. And that's what I try to do with every deck, is I need to find the cards that can do it to anything at any time. And that's basically how I want to build the deck. I don't ever hesitate on that stuff. I'll jam them in, and if I don't like them later down the line, I'll cut them and put in something different.
Okay, that makes sense. One thing that's nice about artifact and enchantment stuff is there's just so many options. Obviously, there's not a whole lot in Chris's favorite colors for the most part. But like if you have access to green or access to white, there's a lot of different things you can do. For myself, if I'm playing white, I tend to run Austere Command and sometimes Cleansing Nova as well. And a large part of that is the ability to use them to take out artifacts or enchantments. My one black-white deck has Merciless Eviction and Austere Command. Again, same reason I can tweak it to hit artifacts or enchantments or even planeswalkers, I guess, discussing planeswalker removal. But yeah, it tends to be like the glamour kind of effects or the nature's lore, or excuse me, nature's claim kind of effects that hit artifacts or enchantments I tend to run. The one thing I would say that's worth noting here is I really don't run like the shatter kind of cards, destroy target artifact, or I guess erase is the white one, destroy target enchantment, or it's an exile, I guess. Those I don't run any of. I think Max does in Brago because you can blink them, but like that's a little bit different. It's probably worth running an efficient creature that just deals with enchantments when you can use it a bunch of times.
Yes. Don't, I believe.
Oh, you've rotated that out? You had something at one point, I thought.
I had War Priest of Thune in there, and that only hit enchantments, I believe.
Okay. But since then, you probably just got too many different things that hit any target, I would guess, over the course of the year, maybe, and you've rotated those in instead, maybe?
Well, Brago is the deck where I run mainly counter magic, so I've kind of shifted from creatures that destroy artifacts or enchantments to more of a I'm just going to counter it. I do run cards like, Act of Authority, which is an enchantment that lets me exile an artifact or enchantment, but that's pretty much it. Like the rest of them are all counter spells. I'd rather just counter that and make sure it doesn't hit the field at all.
Okay. I think the one exception, or I guess things that deal with just one of those types, I would say, I do have Vandal Blast and a couple red decks. Yes, you can single target it, and I guess I have before, but it's like one of those Cyclonic Rift things where the overload is so strong that I think Vandal Blast is worth a slot most of the time. And I have Back to Nature in a green deck, which is a 2-mana instant speed, destroy all enchantments. And it's in my Glissa deck, or at least it is sometimes. I'm not sure if it is right now, but it comes in and out depending on the day of the week. And that's a deck that doesn't have many enchantments. I think there's 4 in the deck, so it doesn't really hit me very hard. And it's instant speed and 2 mana. Like that's super efficient too. So that is one I do run that just hits enchantments. But I mean, both of those are cases of a card being super efficient. So I don't mind the fact that it hits one. Otherwise, it tends to be the things that hit, more than one of those 2 different permanent types for sure. So, we mentioned creatures as being a great way to remove planeswalkers. How about creatures, Max? What's your plan there?
I love board wipes. I think Jamocha, between board wipes and targeted removal, I run like 11 pieces of creature removal, and that's not even counting the stuff that can lock a creature down, like a Song of the Dryads, a Darksteel Mutation, or something like that. Mainly because that Brago specifically is kind of a slower deck, so I'm typically the one with the least amount of creatures on board, so losing 2 bodies compared to 4 to 5 from all my opponents is it's asymmetrical. Yeah, I lose something too, but not as much as they did, so I always feel like I'm getting the better edge of the deal when I cast board wipes in that deck.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's maybe the most obvious one for most players. I just think most people are in board wipes.
Yeah, that's for sure. For me, that's the same thing. Board wipes, or, like my favorite card in Commander that everyone hates is like your Ensnaring Bridge or your Silent Arbiter type effects,
I
where
thought
it's just
you were going to say Lightning Bolt.
Not in Commander, man. Not in Commander. Lightning Bolt is a really good card, but... No, those 2 effects, they're artifacts, so they are easier to remove because we just discussed, like the artifact removal that we personally run and, stuff like that. But you don't have to kill the creatures then. You just sit back and be like, you can't attack me anyway, so go do something else.
Right.
There's also cards, like I talked about earlier, something like Blind Obedience or Authority of the Consuls, or the couple of the Thalias that make sure your opponent's creatures enter tapped. So it may not destroy them, but it is definitely a tempo hit to where it might save you a couple extra turns from being hit with that Craterhoof that's going to come down tapped, and only a few things can swing at you.
Yeah, or, since you're talking about Silent Arbiter, things like, Propaganda and, Sphere of Safety or whatever deal with creatures for sure. I mean, they at least keep them from being able to hurt you. They might not solve the problem of an Oracle of Moldiah giving you an extra land drop or something, but like it's going to keep you from dying pretty often. So that's something some people do. Like there are people that I've ran into that are just, I put Propaganda in every blue deck. I'm not one of them, but like that's a thing people do.
I can't justify that card in half of my decks, that play blue. It's just like, it's not good enough in my opinion.
I kind of feel the same way. It's also one of those things, the problem I found with those kind of effects is they force you to make decisions based on an assumption that might not apply. So like, for example, okay, I can swing out at this person, or I can not play this blocker because I have propaganda out and I'm probably not going to get hit. And then the person's like, before the end of your turn, I'm going to disenchant your propaganda. Like, oh, yep. Well, that changed everything. And now I'm going to lose. So like, that's happened to me multiple times. So like, I don't like relying on those effects because the math of your decision making can change in a split second. And that's true of a lot of things, but it feels like it's burned me there more than it has in other places.
Agreed.
Yeah, board wipes. I mean, my rule is I usually try to have 3 in every deck. I don't want to run so many that it becomes obnoxious either, but like you have to have a couple, you know? And then single target creature removal, I run some, but it tends to be those super efficient ones. So, hey, I'm playing white. I have a Path to Exile and a Swords to Plowshares probably in that deck because they're just so crazy powerful and efficient. If I'm playing blue, there's a good chance there's a Pondify or a Reality Shift or Rapid Hybridization in that deck. Because again, like it's 1 mana. It's super easy to leave that up, or it's super easy to solve a problem. Like you are almost always coming out ahead when you trade 1 mana in 1 card for their 1 card that they spent 5 mana on or something.
Yeah, and those are the cards that I want to, discuss too, like your Pondify and even go into like Beast Within and Generous Gift type of deal. You may be giving them a 3/3 token out of that, but you're getting rid of something that probably was a 7/7 or something dumb like that, or it had just an ability that was gonna turn the tide of the game. So it's okay to give them things like that and take a couple shots from a 3/3, whereas you're saving the game overall.
Yeah. Well, and this is probably a good time to kind of mention this, I guess, because most of the things we're going to talk about briefly after this aren't necessarily like removal so much as they are answers, because there are situations or color groups. So like, let's say you're playing Abzan, where you have access to Generous Gift and Beast Within and Anguish Unmaking and Vindicate and Utter End and Despark and, Putrefy and Mortify. Like you have a bunch of things in those colors that hit almost any type. Like, right?
Sure
like you can Beast Within anything. So in that case, you maybe need to worry way less about Planeswalker hate or dealing with enchantments or dealing with creatures when you can run 6 different spells that literally hit any target.
Yep. Now, some of them are not quite as efficient as, your path and stuff like that. But I think, versatility over efficiency is way better.
Yeah, that's when I think the things that's when you probably quit running your naturalizes and your deglammers and probably still leave Swords and Path in, but you take out that artifact and enchantment answers because you have the Beast Within and the Generous Gift and the Anguish Unmaking, for example.
Yeah, I would definitely play Path in a deck like that, because that's another thing, like if you get land hosed or something, you can just be like, well, I got this, 1/1 sitting out here or something like that, and like I'm just going to Path it and go get myself a land, so I'm back on my colors where I need to be.
Right. So kind of as a subsection of this, do you guys make decisions where you're thinking about, okay, not only am I dealing with creatures, I kind of want specific ways to solve problematic commanders? Is that something you think about at all, Max?
Yes and no, I guess. I feel like a lot of that can be solved with a Rule 0 conversation. If I show up wanting to play, my pre-con deck and someone whips out a Korvold optimized Korvold deck, that's a Rule 0 discussion. I know I have no way of dealing with that problematic commander, but I think it's just more of if your deck can't win without the commander, maybe you just make sure the commander never hits the field, or it hits the field so much that they can't recast it. I think it just comes down to more of a player removal situation for me. I'm not too concerned about, who's commander. I kind of think about your decks and Chris's decks. I don't find any of the commanders problematic in the stereotypical sense, but I do know that I probably have a harder time beating Mogus than I would Alesha, and I have a harder time beating Reki than I would maybe Vela, depending on what deck I'm choosing to play in those matchups. But I never really think about problematic commanders in my brewing, because you never know what you're going to run into, unless, again, you're in that group where you only play with the same 3 or 4 people every week.
How about you, Chris? What are your thoughts on this one?
Nope. I don't. It doesn't even cross my mind once about, the commander in general. It's more about the deck strategy than what the commander's actually doing, because you can stop strategies, whereas you can't stop a single card.
Right. Yeah, I kind of am in the same boat here as well, because there are those like Nevermore kind of effects where you can name a card and the person can't cast it.
Weeblet or whatever. They just reprinted that too.
Gideon's Intervention.
Yeah, there's one as well. Those I tend to not think about in terms of commanders. I guess the thing would be something like a Darksteel Mutation or a Lignify are two things. Kenra's Transformation is one as well. Are pretty good creature removal spells just in general. They're kind of efficient. And the fact that they keep the person from replaying the commander is useful, but it's not just because of that. That's just kind of an added bonus. It's maybe kind of like the Hex Parasite thing where I'm running Hex Parasite already in the deck, and the fact that I can use it to kill a Planeswalker is a bonus. The fact that I can use that Darksteel Mutation to keep that Chulane from being recast until they can find a way to remove the Darksteel Mutation or sacrifice it or something is an added bonus, but I'm not running that just to kill the Chulane. I'm running Imprison in the Moon in a deck where I'm running it because it can hit multiple different things and solve those problems, including someone's commander. Like, that's not the reason I'm doing it, but the fact that it does do that is one of the reasons I haven't taken it out. So it's a bit like that Planeswalker thing where it's an added bonus, and that added bonus is useful enough that I keep the cards in the deck, but I'm not running them just to deal with commanders. So we've talked about like permanent types primarily. We're going to get a little bit more abstract here in the end. Do you guys worry about tutors? Do you run any of the anti-tutoring stuff like the even Mind Sensor kind of cards? That kind of thing you plan on dealing with tutors, or is that the kind of thing where you're like, just it's a rule zero situation? I'm not going to be playing against decks where someone's tutoring 6 times in a turn.
I used to run even Mind Sensor in Dromoka because it was a flyer for 3 mana with a cool ability. I've taken it out because there's been better cards printed over time, and I mean, I run 2 or 3 tutors in a few of my decks, so, you know, it's kind of pot calling the kettle black there. If I play anti-tutor tech in half of my decks and a ton of tutors in the other half, that just doesn't sit okay with me.
Okay.
I also feel like in a singleton format, you know, your 1 copy of Stranglehold, you might not see it. You know, that type of thing. So I think...
And it feels bad when you draw it and play it and you don't see any tutors. You just see the one person who tries to play their Terramorphic Expanse or something.
Right.
Yeah. How about you, Chris? Is this something you think about really at all in Commander?
No, not at all. There's only one deck that I have something like that in, and that is in my Petitioner's deck. And that's the Ashiok. And it's not even in there for the fact that it stops people from tutoring. It's just in there to mill people. That's the only reason it's in there. It's just an added bonus that it can just be like, oh yeah, your Vamp tutor is worthless now, or your land tutors are worthless for the 2 turns that she stays alive. And that's all that it is.
Yeah, I'm very much in the same boat there. It's not something I plan for. Sometimes it kind of works out. The Aven Mind Sensor is a good example, Max. If I was playing a bird tribal deck or something, there's probably a pretty good chance I'd have an Aven Mind Sensor in there, and it would probably stay in the deck because it is useful, but I wouldn't be running it just for that ability.
Yeah, the best anti-tutor cards in the world are the ones that come out of your mouth when you look at someone and be like, really, you're going to tutor for the 7th time? You know,
right,
I didn't realize we were playing that type of game.
Right, no, you're not wrong.
Now, if you're cracking fetch lands, you know, like repeatedly, whatever, I don't care.
Yeah,
it's where you're going Vamp Tutor into Demonic Tutor and Personal Tutor and all that other stuff, and it's just like, really? You can just play card draw, you know, and actually have a fun game.
To kind of put a bow on this at the end, rather than go through just a bunch of possible ones that we all probably don't plan too much around, are there anything else, any other like strategies or concepts that you guys do specifically run answers for? And I will take this one first before I throw it to Max, because the one that jumps out at me is I do specifically in my Glissa the Trader deck have plans to deal with token decks. Now there's 2 reasons for this in that deck. Number one, when I first built it, the person I was playing against the most often was a friend of ours named Frank, who just had like 3 he played token decks. All his decks were token decks. So I had a plan to deal with tokens because that was one of my first decks. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to run, you know, whether at the time it was Ratchet Bomb. I think now I have an Engineered Explosives in there. So I needed a couple cards to deal with tokens because he always had them. And in running those cards, kind of realized with the way Glissa works, because whenever an opponent's creature dies, I can bring an artifact back to my hand. That would give me like 5 triggers, right? If someone made 5 tokens and I dropped a Ratchet Bomb and just popped it for 0, I'd kill 5 things and get 5 recursion triggers. So in that deck, I found it just has worked out that being able to run ways to deal with tokens gives me a bunch of added utility. So, you know, I have an Engineered Explosives in there right now to deal with tokens, and I have a Culling Ritual in the deck, and that has additional added utility of just being a really good card and giving you a bunch of mana. But same thing. It's when I fired that Coloring Ritual off, it's going to give me a bunch of Glissa triggers probably in addition to making a bunch of mana. It's just giving me a bunch of extra utility in that deck. It's a deck that runs a bunch of Death Touch creatures. So I have a Plague Engineer in there, which is really useful, and being able to name whatever particular token is causing me problems to give them all -1/-1. I get a bunch of triggers there too. So like that's a deck where I specifically have a bunch of ways to deal with tokens because it gives the whole deck a bunch of extra utility. But on the average, I'm not putting Ratchet Bomb or Engineered Explosives or something into my other decks to problem solve someone's token deck. So that's just one kind of exception for that. Are there any of these kind of things that you guys plan for? And I'll ask you first, Max, that we haven't talked about.
No, I guess I don't. Okay. I feel like I'm sure I have cards in my deck that can deal with tokens or can deal, like we've talked about all show, but I don't necessarily plan when I build a deck like, yep, I need to make sure I include a Ratchet Bomb or an Engineered Explosives for those token decks because I like to play tokens. I don't want to lose my stuff, similar to Chris and his graveyard. So I don't know. When I brew my decks, I brew about how I want the deck to work and how I hope the deck's going to win. And yeah, I try to cover all the normal grounds, like, okay, do I have some creature removal? Do I have some planeswalker removal? Do I have, this and that? But I don't specifically say, geez, I always play with Frank who has 6 token decks. I should probably put in, a bunch of things that deal with tokens. No, because maybe I won't play with Frank again, or Frank changes all his decks. So, like, again, I think it's not, for us, it's kind of not great to plan specifically for a specific strategy because we play with a bunch of random people, so we never know what we're going to run into, and I would rather lose a game and get to play cards versus lose a game because I had a grip full of dead cards in my hand that didn't do anything to the game.
Sure. The one that I think that I probably should have mentioned for mine, but I think you do too, is maybe theft decks a little bit, because I think we both tend to run Homeward Paths in quite a few of our decks.
We do, yeah, because I think we had a player for a while that had some theft cards in their deck. So like Homeward Path was a cool card when it came out, and now I have a bunch of copies of it, so I put it in every deck on the off chance something happens, and it's really fun to say, okay, you can hit me with my commander, but I'm just going to take it back when you swing at me. So haha, don't swing at me.
Well, and it's also one of those cards talking about opportunity cost. There's none to it for the most part. It's a colorless land. You can put it in your deck, and if no one steals your thing for 10 straight games, it's just almost not a problem at all that you notice. And then there's that one time when someone wants to steal something and you can totally shut it off. You've lost nothing by running it, and the one time it works, it absolutely pays for itself. How about you, Chris? Any final ones here you want to mention at all, or do we cover most of them?
I have slotted in certain cards to, like one-ofs, just in the happen chance that you run into that type of deck, you have a card in there that can just hose on them. Like I have Rampaging Ferocidon in Mogus for the token types themes, but it also prevents life gain, because I need to stop life gain.
Right.
Max actually put me onto a card that I have yet to play against someone. I want to see it work.
I didn't do it.
It's called Ancient Runes, and it's a 3-mana red enchantment that reads, during each player's upkeep, Ancient Runes deals 1 damage to that player for each artifact he or she controls.
Oh, I did do that. I'll take credit for that.
And I have yet to play it, so I don't know how good it is, but every deck is running artifacts, so that just hoses on them. And I mean, tiny little things I've added in to deal with other certain strategies, but not like a full suite of things to deal with one type of thing.
Okay. Yeah. I think the other one I would say I have ran in the past, and I'm not doing that much of it right now, is ways to get around Cyclonic Rift in particular. Obviously, Teferi's Protection does it, but you also have things like Eerie Interlude and Ghostway in white. And I've ran those in the past, and I could see myself putting them back into decks because Teferi's Protection is obviously fantastic, but even Ghostway and Eerie Interlude, even if you're not just using them to dodge a rift, you can use them to dodge a board wipe, or you can use them to generate ETB triggers. So there's a lot of utility there, but I think if they were just ways to dodge rift, I probably wouldn't run them. Again, they're cards that dodge rift and do other things. So that was the one other one that kind of jumped out at me is what I would call kind of anti-rift tech, but it's also it's anti-rift tech that does a whole lot of other stuff that's probably something that's stronger than just dodging rift. Or board wipes, I guess. Talking about dealing with board wipes, Heroic Intervention. But again, I don't know if that's even so much an anti-board wipe card as it is just a great card. And since you can use it to, dodge anything, target removal or whatever, then it's a great card that just also happens to dodge board wipes and dodge a bunch of stuff. So
yeah, I've been buying up every Akroma's Will I can find for my decks. I've been playing. I play a lot of Whiten decks because I look at it as a heroic intervention type card or a I win the game type of card.
Yeah, right. Yes, being able to turn someone else's board wipe into a one-sided board wipe is super, super powerful.
Yes.
All right, gentlemen, I think that is going to wrap up this episode of Commander Central. I think we went over a whole lot of these, but I'm curious what our listeners have to say about strategies that they particularly plan around and how they deal with solving those problems. So if you have anything you want to talk about that we didn't mention or that's a big deal to you, reach out and let us know. I am Dana. You can find me on Twitter at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max. And you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. And our show is edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find him online at Ursa Bearwalker. We will be back next week with a new show. Until then, I am Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.